podcast with your host, Don Abernathy.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II based podcast. And we're doing the rare redo, the remake, the update, the making it good. And it is VE Day. And we'll get to that momentarily. I was actually going to open up the show with something kind of cool, but I floundered and I effed up, as we tend to do. But that's all right. We can play here in a second. Joining us from Florida, we actually did about 45 minutes, as we were promising on the last episode, from the event in Dade City, Florida, at the Florida Pioneer Village. Forgive me, the people at the Florida Pioneer Village. I'm sorry, it's the first time there. I really don't have any formal documentation, so I keep stumbling over the name of your facility. For that, I apologize. And for that, I apologize. I just burped for those of you off scene. I just came home from a birthday party. My niece turned 21. But joining us from Bradenton, Florida, Paul Niccum. Paul, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing all right, Don. How are you?
I've been doing all right. Just fighting back a little bit of post-dinner burping there. Do you know the exact name of the facility in which we had that spectacular event at a few weeks back?
I think it's the Dade City Pioneer Village.
I guess I have a Google machine in front of me. I guess if I was it's somebody who produced a radio show for 6 years. It's a lot harder when you're hosting and trying to produce at the same time. But Dade City, Florida Pioneer. Yes, it's the Dade City, Florida Pioneer Museum. The Pioneer Florida Museum and Village is an open-air museum in Dade City, Florida in Pasco County. The museum complex includes Overstreet House, a one-room schoolhouse, which is very cool, by the way, a church, a train depot, which you guys seen in the photos on the last episode at the WTSPWorldWar2.com, as well as our Facebook page, a train engine with a big-ass bell, mind you, a museum expedition of tools, household items, antiques, and farm equipment. And when we were there, they did have the very respected and loved blacksmith, pounding out metal. They were doing their thing. They were doing their basically their equivalent to living history, but theirs is full action. I mean, had the kilns going, the heaters, the whole 9 yards, the forge. They were banging and making up stuff. But Paul and I, we got together Saturday night. We got out the At Computers WTSP podcast studio in a crate, and we set up in a museum. And with COVID and the long time we took off with the year, the podcast studio in a crate took a little neglect, and turns out one of the two microphone cables had a short in it. And so I was laying on the bottom of the hardwood floor in this citrus museum, and we made it work. But as I was editing it last night, I took out all the echoes, took out all the hissing and the popping, and I had it for what it is. Anybody listening to the show knows that remote recordings don't sound that great, but we make do. But apparently I need to change out the laptop, and I saw it doing this while we were recording, but there wasn't much I could do about it. I saw the timeline would pause, and then all of a sudden fast forward, and so I thought it recorded and kept up. But it turns out, Paul, when I was editing it, you would say a word, and then it's almost like someone was fast forwarding to the third sentence down, and so it was really unsalvageable. And I can get past the audio deficiency, but when I'm trying to talk to you and every third line of your sentence from your paragraph is missing, I was like, you know what? That's not fair to Paul. It's not fair to the audience. So here we are. Paul is joining us from his house. We're here. And it kind of fell into place because, as I said at the top of the show, today is, in fact, the anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. And so why don't we just take a brief moment to remember that.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hail the end of the war in Europe. It is 5 years and more since Hitler marched into Poland. Years full of suffering and death and sacrifice. Now the war against Germany is won. A grateful nation gives thanks for victory. Hundreds of thousands crowd into American churches to give thanks to God. President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is a solemn but glorious hour. I wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to see this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe. For this victory, we join in offering our thanks to the Providence which has guided and sustained us through the dark days of adversity and into light. Much remains to be done. The victory won in the West must now be won in the East. The whole world must be cleansed of the evil from which half the world has been freed. United, the peace-loving nations have demonstrated in the West that their arms are stronger by far than the might of dictators or the tyranny of military cliques that once called us soft and weak. The power of our peoples to defend themselves against all enemies will be proved in the Pacific War as it was proved in Europe.
Historic pictures of the last days of the war in Europe show American and Russian troops as they joined at Torgau on the River Elbe, splitting German armies in two. United States General Reinhardt meets Red Army General Rusakov, a meeting that spelled out certain German defeat. At Allied Mediterranean headquarters in Italy, the Germans unconditionally give up all of Italy and southern Austria. In civilian clothes, representatives of the German armies signed the surrender document. General W.D. Morgan, representing Supreme Mediterranean Commander Alexander, signs for the Allies. Preceding the final capitulation at Reims, this surrender eliminated 1 million German troops. Inside Germany itself, the Allies seized the famous Stadium of Nuremberg, scene of countless Nazi Party rallies. With the capture of this famous southern German city, the American flag flouts out the swastika.
And the cool thing is, at the end of that news clip, they show them blowing up the German eagle on top of that building.
In a symbolic gesture, American troops destroy the Nazi Party emblem.
It's insane to think that Japan wouldn't surrender for 4 more months, and only after dropping 2 atomic bombs did they finally come to the realization that it's a lost cause. And it's I have a book someone got me for Christmas one year. It's called The Last, I think it's called The Last Ace. I'm trying to glance across the room. Or The Last Fighter Pilot. One of the two. I do apologize. But he was explaining in it that there was one more patrol that was sent out during the last days of the war before Japan surrendered. And his wingman was shot down and killed after the surrender and the signing. They didn't get the message. So they were sent out on one more raid. And his wingman was shot down tragically for no reason. And that particular wingman was like 17 or 18. To this day holds the title of the highest IQ of any pilot to ever fly in the American Armed Forces. And was also the grandfather of Scarlett Johansson.
Oh.
How crazy is that? Luckily, he had his children before he went off the war. But yeah, it's so sad to think that if they wouldn't have went on that mission, or if the radio traffic would have gotten to him, he would have never perished that way. So I have this book here someone got me a few years ago. It's literally every news article published in the New York Times about World War II. It even goes to the end, all the way up to 1947. And so we just played that little news article from the movie houses for today, which was Victory in Europe Day. So there's no real reason to read the New York Times Post. But interestingly enough, on the same newspaper on the same day, Dateline, May 8th, 1945. Now, I'm going to ruin the name of this facility, which historically sucks, but Realistically, I don't care because horrible things happen there. Oswiecim, Oswiecim. It was a concentration camp in Poland. We'll just say Auschwitz killings placed at 400,000. Soviet Commission reports death camp in Poland was founded by Himmler. Moscow, May 7th. More than 400,000 persons were systematically slaughtered in a single German concentration camp in Poland, near Krakow. From 1939 to 1944, the Germans thus accomplished with scientific efficiency the greatest incident of mass murder in record history. And it goes on to explain the atrocities. So in that same newspaper, we're celebrating the fact that the war is over, but the day before the end of the war, the Russians find a concentration camp that had over 400,000 people that they wiped off the face of the earth. It just, I don't know. It's crazy to think of the amount of death, destruction, and malice perpetrated by a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can say, well, it was primarily Hitler. Yes, a lot of it was orchestrated by him, but let's be honest. One man couldn't do that alone. He had to have a group of supporters who shared the same insane ideology. And thank God on this day, only after that psychopath killed himself, that the Germans said, hey, okay, we're done. It's just a damn shame that they failed at their attempt of assassination on him at his camp.
Mm-hmm. July 20th plot.
Mm-hmm. So, real quick, just because, no, not real quick, we're going to rewind and go back because we want to cover the lost information that we did at our interview at the Florida Pioneer Museum, which was, now I was under the impression that was the first event to take place there of a World War II manner. And I'm finding out now it was the second? Are you aware of this?
That was the second specific World War II event. We did an event in December, November. That was a timeline, but this past was the second pure just World War II event.
Yeah, because for those of you who watched the video of me doing my Savage Anywhere where I pushed a Army Jeep damn near a mile and a half, Joseph Gibson, the guy steering the Jeep, who owns the Jeep, said he was up there at that first event. And I was like, I thought we were at the first event. So apparently we were at the second event. But it's cool. I mean, the more events up there, the better. And when it comes to World War II reenacting and new events, as we spoke about in the past, usually anytime someone launches a new event, people are hesitant to pack up all their stuff and make the trip if it's not going to be worthwhile. And so a lot of guys will send one or two people from their group. If they have a large group, they'll kind of be like the patrol, check it out and say, hey, this is a good event. Definitely let's come to the second or the third one. And so as these things continue to they definitely continue to grow. And so it was actually kind of nice to think that that was the second one, especially the second one in less than a year. So, I mean, that's great progress as far as a new event goes.
Oh, yeah. The first event that took place was in January, and that was really just trial run.
Okay.
It was only a day event. There was probably 6 or 7 GIs and about 6 or 7 Germans. The first SS came out for the Germans, and then us GIs. It's the usual group of us.
Yeah, ragtag crew.
Mm-hmm. And it went over without a hitch. So they approved for a full weekend, and that's the one that you and I did.
So the first one was kind of like a beta test to see what the interest in basically kind of probationary so that the people running the museum would get an idea of what it would be like to have a full weekend dedicated to it.
Yep.
So let's get a little bit of your history, Paul. How did you get into living history and World War II reenacting? What is it that brought you here and fueled your fire and lit your candle?
Well, Sam Howell, his daughter, Hannah, her and I were in class together in high school, and one day I was talking about something about history, like I normally do, and she was like, "Oh yeah, you come out to this event in Paris, Von Kessinger's Express." I'm like, "What's that?" She's like, "Oh, it's a World War II reenactment, yada yada yada." I went out there, and I woke up the first morning, and just the awe of everything was 1940s, World War II, being early November. There was kind of a haze.
Now, did you come out there as a spectator or were you a participant?
I was a participant. My first year,
Civilian, I assume, because most people don't have uniforms just laying around.
yeah, the first year for Saturday I was a civilian, and then for Sunday I was a partisan. But we don't talk about that because it was very farby.
Well, it always is. I always bust. He hasn't been on his podcast. I don't think ever will. He's too shy. But I remember Hunter when he first got started.
Mhm.
I was there on the ship the day that fateful photo was taken for the Tampa Bay Tribune, where little Hunter, who is now when I met him, he was like up to my chest. He was so damn short. Now he's taller than I am. But I think he had himself a little medic helmet, a Vietnam era blouse on, and he had the web belt and the haversack. But here he is trying to get into this hobby, and it's a hobby that everybody loves to prove how much they know by showing, pointing out how bad someone's uniform is when it's on public display. And so here he is. He's probably maybe in 8th grade. I don't even think he's in high school yet. And he's on the cover of the newspaper, and his farbiness is just shining as bright as the eye can see. Mixed era uniform, and he never lets that down. But yep, I've actually known him since then. And the second time I went, he was there. His uniform had been corrected, and he was there. I think I did that ship at least 2 or 3 times. Back when it was me, Ted, Mike Alvarez, Eric Ryan, believe it or not, and Ben Schmoot before he lost the weight. So, yeah, that goes back a while. That's when we got to walk through downtown. That's technically Ybor City, or is it Tampa?
It's downtown Tampa. It's Channel Side.
Nothing like walking through downtown Tampa in full uniform with an M1 Garand slung over his shoulder. No one says a word. We walked from the marina afterwards all the way down to like 3 or 4 blocks of some history museum just to have lunch, and we're in full uniform, rifle slung over our shoulder.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think part of the problem is people don't realize the uniforms we're wearing are 80 years old or from 80 years ago, so they just assume we're active military and walk around downtown Tampa with rifles slung over our shoulders, and no one said a damn word, not a one.
Well, yeah, like I was telling you, when we were out at the Pioneer Village Saturday or Friday morning, the battery on the vehicle I was using went dead. So Chandler and myself, we went up to AutoZone. The guy looks us up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing said. I said, "Hey, I need a new battery." He's like, "Okay, it's going to be about $80 or $180."
He tried to give you a military discount.
No, he gave me the military discount.
Oh, geez.
I didn't even realize it until I looked at my receipt and he said something, and I already paid, and I'm walking out the door. I'm like, 160?
Oh, no.
That doesn't sound right. And then I looked down, I'm like, yeah.
And then you promptly turned back and got you refunded that discount so that you didn't feel bad for it.
Yeah.
I've seen people try to get. It's like, no, I'm not active. Just like when I first got into it, I would try to change and be in my uniform so that when I got to the event, I wasn't changing in the parking lot. But I don't want to say I got tired of it because it's not the right word. I just became overtly aware of people's lack of knowledge on history and uniforms. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like the feeling of, I'd be walking to the gas station to get a coffee or a soda. Thanks for your service. And then I have to stop. No, I'm not in the service. I'm a World War II reenactor. I will take your thanks and pass it on. So now I'll have the pants on, the boots on. I'll just put on a WTSP t-shirt. That way when I'm stopping at places, I don't have to, be concerned with. Technically, it's not stolen valor because if I was pretending to be this military person who wore this uniform, I'd be 92 years old.
And we would look damn good. So.
But either way, just to avoid that whole thing, I just wear a t-shirt until I get to the parking lot, and then I usually change. Or actually, now I usually change after I set up my camp. But so your first event was VKE. You jumped in, cannonball, farb first on the second day, but you got bit by the bug, huh?
Yeah, I got hooked.
And that's a big part of living history, and I haven't talked about this for a while, but you're kind of a salesman. You're to be a living historian in uniform, doing not reenacting, but actually doing a living history presentation is no different than being a salesman at an electronic convention, or if you work for a gun company and you're at the gun show and you have your table set up. Or you're an insurance salesman at some insurance convention in Vegas. You're basically set up in front of your booth. You're trying to get people's attention. You're trying to sell them on your product, which in this case is knowledge. And you're presenting your display, and you're giving a presentation, whether you like to think of it or not. And a lot of cats who get into this, they don't have that social butterfly. They don't have the comfort that comes with presenting a product to a group of strangers. And so VKE being your first event is a good one to start out because you can either be a prop in the background on the train or you can participate. But with that being said, there's only so much room for so many props on that train. And whenever we have new cats at the event, obviously they want to ride the train. There's only so much room. But the people who make the logistical calls, they kind of have to juggle their desire to make you happy with it being your first time and you being on the train versus there's only so many room for so many props, and I'd rather have a prop that wants to interact and play. That particular event is more theater than it is living history. And that's not a bad thing because the public loves it and the museum makes a lot of money. But once again, I don't want to say you're acting, you're doing improv. There's a timeline, there's a story. It's up to you to interact with the audience, and based off their interaction with you, and you maintain that story, that era, and it's an improv. And that's one of the reasons I love that event, because last year I didn't get on the train because I let some other people go. But I have great photos from like the first 2 years where I'm like inspecting one of the, this gentleman was doing French citizen. So he was in aircraft garb and he had a bag. And I have a photo on the Southwest Florida World War II page of me inspecting the bag, which, by the way, he had this great documentation of V2 rockets in there. So he was a scientist trying to sneak out. And speaking of Sam Howell, there's a great shot. Sam Howell's holding a gun. Art's looking over me, and I'm like digging through his bag. It's in black and white photos. It's a Don Dickey photo. It's a great shot, but I love that event because I love the acting part of it. I love the performance involved. But sometimes you're like, well, somebody else can go, and then you find out, well, that person just sat in the back the whole time. It's like, well, now you're cutting down on the show. But back to the whole point at hand, because it's an act, because you can either participate or not, it's a great way to get involved in the event, because even if you know history, it's kind of like, and then we'll get to this shortly with what one of your new roles is with the USO shows, but I just thought about it. It's kind of like someone doing open mic night for the first time.
Yeah.
They may come down to the comedy club. They may have a desire to sign up for open mic night, but they're like, you know what? I'm going to sit around and see how this thing plays out. And so someone might come to their first living history event, might have their uniform, a small display, but they don't have their beats worked out. You know, they'll interact with the public and they'll talk about a few things, but it's more of a conversational tone, answer question, Whereas the Arts, the Megs, the Sams, the Troys, the John Bonets of the world, the Jeremy Petrellas of the world, they have a presentation. And it's something they have said so many times that, much like a comedian who's done the same set 50 times on his one tour, it becomes smoother flowing, you know. And so a lot of times when somebody first gets involved, they'll answer a few questions like, oh, here's Sam. He knows a lot more than I do. Sam, can you answer these questions? And I did the same thing. I remember, you know, first couple of events I went to, it was like, oh, here's Eric. He knows a lot more about this tank that we're standing in front of. I'm going to ask him. Later, I find out that Eric's full of shrimp, but that's neither here nor there. Look, I, you know, I'm not throwing him under the bus, but it turns out there's a lot of things I heard that cat say that were completely nonsense, but I won't throw him under the bus on a podcast, but he's not in the hobby anymore anyhow. But anyhow, so after you did VKE and you decided to get involved in the hobby, was there a certain timeline, a certain thing? Because once again, everybody kind of builds their display around something to have, you know, they have in their collection or something they know a lot about. Meg has been on the show before. She has her home front display. You know, some guys have Thompsons, some guys have medical tents. In this case of Jeremy Petrella and the boys from Georgia, they have their EE8 field phones. They got their full telephone bank. They got their whole setup for, you know, the communications tent. So what did you build your little display around?
Well, my first couple years of doing or being in the hobby, I was all over the place.
Yeah.
First started with Airborne and did that for about a year and a half. And then I was like, well, this is going to kind of boring. Or not really boring, just the functionality of doing the whole Airborne aspect of it. It doesn't always work out. And Sam Howell was like, hey, we're starting the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment that works with Rabbi Rob.
Mm-hmm.
You want to join? I'm like, yeah, sure. So that's how I kind of started building an infantry impression.
Sure.
And when we weren't doing stuff with them, Art would always bring out his field desk. And while they're doing their officer stuff, I would sit there and just write fake letters and whatnot. And then it kind of blossomed from there, doing the whole company clerk. Now that I'm doing, or that I've filled into an officer role, doing having that as like a company office.
You have a typewriter now, correct?
I've had a typewriter for years. I used to type my high school reports on a typewriter.
But you have an error correct typewriter though?
My error correct one is broken. I'll pull that one out.
What model is that?
The
one you use for your display under the fly.
That one is a Royal Portable Quiet Deluxe 1951.
Okay. But I would imagine there probably wasn't a whole hell of a lot of design changes between the 1944 model and the 1950 model.
There really wasn't. The only big difference is the change in the keys, and they decided to start coloring. They changed the colors of the typewriter paint.
Sure.
Instead of just being the flat black, they started doing like the grays and the beiges.
They have a kind of blue tint to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so you quickly kind of move through the ranks. You've kind of become the Sam and Art go-to guy for logistics and organization. Thus to the fact that last year, and we briefly talked about this on another podcast, with the COVID-19 and the VKE, they were considering canceling it at first. And they're like, well, we don't want to cancel it, but living historians are a fickle bunch. And it's bad enough that we make you guys wear bracelets under your uniforms. You know, you got guys shaving and in my case dyeing their hair and even wearing the air correct underwear. Yes, I'm that guy. But I'm going to make you wear this big fluorescent green-orange bracelet, or at least ask you to, but I know she put it in your pocket. And so the idea of them walking around with face mask on a lot of guys aren't going to show up. So what are we going to do? And Paul said, I got an idea, because I'm a glutton for a punishment. What did you do, Paul? How did you save VKE? Now, I'm sure other people will say he didn't personally save it, but I'm going to say it right here, right now. Paul, how did you personally save VKE during COVID-19?
I decided, instead of making the train just a basic general plain train, make it a hospital train with patients with tuberculosis.
Yeah, because the storyline's been the same forever, which isn't bad. But basically, the storyline is you're on a German. I don't want to say German occupied. Let's just say German commandeered train in France, or you're in a passenger train in German occupied France, and so you show up to the train museum, and there is or there used to be. I don't know if we had it last year, a 15-foot swastika flag. And there's guys walking around in German uniform handing out passports and papers and this and that, and we're all out of the camp, so I really don't know what's going on because we're not there. And as the public comes in, they load them on the train, and this train track's probably 5 to 7 miles long, so the train's actually in motion. And then they get on the train. There's a quick skirmish between airborne midway through. The train gets to the end of the track. The Allies come. We have a skirmish. We take over the train. The train goes all the way back. Meanwhile, we're doing the whole ad-lib stuff, the improv stuff, the speeches, the acting out. Train gets all the way back to the station. We come out. Lo and behold, there's the Germans wanting their men back when we have another big skirmish. We are the victors. The crowd goes wild. We issue them out. We back up, reload, get down to the park, and bring in set 2. We do 2 shows on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. But once again, Paul's like, well, let's just make it a hospital ship. Not ship, but hospital train, a tuberculosis train, and that would justify everybody having to wear a face mask. And it worked out great.
Yeah. All we had to do was change 2 lines and add like 4.
Yeah.
Matt De Palma, who's the German, you're a coward for escaping with all these sick people. Oh, how dare you call me a coward, being that he's a Prussian ass.
Yeah.
So, and that's that.
And so let's fast forward to the last weekend, 2 weekends ago now. Great event. We had we had probably 20, 30 allies there, I would say, at least on Saturday. Sundays are always slow and less people, which you can't blame people, especially when they're driving 4 hours or so. They got to go home and unpack and be ready to go to work on Monday. And that's just the way of the hobby. I mean, there's always, thank God, the diehards who stay there both days. And then there's people like Jeremy Petrella who drive down there on Thursday, stay the night, do the educational side. I guess you were there too, where school students, about 200 of them or so, came out and you guys did a little presentation for them.
Yep.
And then they stayed until Sunday. And that's when the sleep deprivation kicked in. You want to talk about realism? You want to talk about what it's like to be stateside troops waiting to be shipped out, whether you're in boot camp, doing field marches, sleeping by train tracks, set up in your camp, a short 40 yards from a double-line, dual-traveling, very active train track, to the point that at least once an hour minimum. It's not the air horn, ladies and gentlemen, who's warning the cars a short 3 blocks away that have no traffic notifications that a train's coming. No, it's not the air horn. It's the banshees. That's right, the banshees. These trains sound like they haven't had a lick of WD-40 or blaster or whatever lubricant you prefer on them in 30 years. Metal on metal's nothing. It's the brakes. It's the screech. It's when you're laying in your tent on the ground, if you're me and not sleeping on a yoga mat like some people, and you're tossing and turning and your hip bone's digging into the dirt because you're down 40 pounds and you're laying on a wool blanket and you're tossing and turning. And here comes the banshees. Here comes the squeals from the train. It sounds like 300 banshees are scratching 500 chalkboards in your tent. Sometimes once an hour. Sometimes twice an hour. You don't know. And when you go to bed at 9 o'clock because you're tired and you want to get some sleep, because the night before you only had 4 hours of sleep because you had to get up early and drive, and you're getting up at 9 in the morning, that's 11 and a half hours, give or take, of banshees screaming in your tent, to the point where you're digging in your uniform pocket, you're pulling out your earplugs and you're shoving them in your ears about 4 a.m., but it doesn't help. It lowers the squeal, but the vibration's still there. The air horn's still there, to the point that some of the guys who got there on Thursday, by Saturday, said, I'm going home for the night. I'll see you fools in the morning, because I've only had 4 hours of sleep for the last 2 days. I got there Saturday. One night of that was enough. How Art, how Jeremy and company dealt with that Friday night. Actually, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. Well, you didn't. You left Saturday night and came home back in the morning. If we have another event, we are setting up in the parking lot. I don't know where we're sleeping.
Absolutely.
We are getting as far away, 40 yards, and I'm not, maybe 50 yards. I'm not even lying. I mean, if my right tricep wasn't hurt, I bet I could hit that train track with an apple easily.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was one of those. And you guys actually, somebody explained it to me when I got there. Like, oh man, there was one train that sounded like it was doing 100 mile an hour. And there was one Saturday night that it was painful. I mean, you literally felt like your head was going to explode. And hey, that's how everybody traveled back in the 40s. It's authentic. Yes, it is, but still. One would argue that they're probably traveling a hell of a lot slower, and they maintained their wheels a little better. I'm sure they weren't that god-awfully loud and screechy. But it was something I've never experienced, especially at an event.
It was miserable.
It did add to the authenticity when you wake up and you've only had, after going to sleep, you went to sleep with the prospect of 11 to 12 hours, but you only got about 4.5 crammed together, getting up, putting on that, going out and doing an event, all dragging ass, all tired. That part, sleep deprivation part, that's authentic, I guess. But, I guess if that's the only complaint you have about a second time event, food was great. The attractions we talked about earlier, the train museum, the one-room schoolhouse with all the artifacts in it, the cool little general store, made for great photos. I am so glad, while you were doing your USO show, which we'll get into momentarily, at the end of probably sometime last year, I finally found an Eisenhower jacket that fit me. And I haven't had the opportunity to wear it to an event. And I heard USO show. So I'm thinking like the Georgia event. Was it Dade Battlefield?
Yep.
When I hear USO show, I'm thinking after hours event. So, brought my Class A uniform, got my Eisenhower jacket, actually spent the evening the night before sewing my patch on and this and that. And then I found out, well, this USO show is actually going to be going on throughout the day to entice the crowd, yada, yada, yada. And so Saturday, okay, that's cool. And Saturday night, they called for rain. So we're all buttoning down the hatches. They're calling for rain at 3 in the morning. We're all sleeping on a hill by the train track, so we wouldn't have flooded out too bad. Thankfully, the rain didn't come until 10 a.m. the next morning. And so after it got done raining, right when the humidity was starting to pick up just floor to right, sadly kept the crowd away a little early. By the time 2 o'clock rolled around, the time we did the reenactment, they were there. But it made for a slow morning, which came beneficial to me. So even though it was hot, I went and took off my HBTs, pulled on my wool trousers, my uniform, and I walked up to the area. And you had just gotten off stage. I asked you to take a few photos of me. So all the photos you guys seen on the page at the train station were shot by Paul here. And then kind of a cool interactive thing I did, because I was stuck by myself with just my phone. I was asking random people. I was in the general store. A lady came and said, "Oh, can you take a photo for me?" "Oh, my husband's a wedding photographer. He'll give me grief." But next thing I know, she's shooting for it. Okay, stand. She went full-blown wedding photographer. I took all the ones in the general store except for the one with the long shot of the bar. I just set my camera up with a timer. And then there's one where I look like I'm buying candy. That one, there was like 2 girls, probably 7 or 8 years old. I was like, "Girls, come here. Take a picture for me." "Oh, sure." And so they shot 2 of those. And so I just put the filters on. But I think it's kind of cool to have photos from an event shot by random people who were there to spectate and enjoy the show. And so, and I'm so glad I did that. But more importantly, when you're there and your second night in, didn't get any sleep last night from the Banshee piloted trains from Doom, and it's hot. The idea of a wardrobe change and going from some nice cotton HPTs to wool trousers, wool button-up shirt, wool Eisenhower jacket, walk around in the Florida sun, it didn't sound appealing. I almost didn't do it. I'm so glad I forced myself to do it, and that's so important to do at an event. There's been so many events where you're just tired, like, okay, you guys go out, I'm going to sit here and drink this soda and smoke this Lucky Strike, and then Monday rolls around and you see all these cool photos that you're not in, you don't have any of them, and you kick yourself in the ass. So for the reenactors, the living historians out there, no matter how tired you are at that event, so if there's a group of young, enthusiastic cats going out for a photo shoot, go with them, because you're going to kick yourself in the ass that you didn't go.
They're always fun.
So,
All the little photo shoots we do.
Speaking of the Georgia events, something happened about 2 events ago that kind of changed the trajectory of your impression and your participation at living history events. And that was, it was the second one. It was the second annual Georgia event. The third annual, we didn't, because of COVID, we didn't do the USO show. Mm-hmm. So year 2 out of the 3, first year and second year, Jeremy Petrola will put on a great event where he would take old dialogue from Bob Hope skits and change some names of towns, etc. And then he would have actors coming out from the local college to participate in these USO shows. They would get extra credit for the college courses, what have you, and they'd have some singers come out and they'd have a jazz band set up. Bob's your uncle. Well, something happened. I don't know the logistics, not important. Year 2, they couldn't make it. Something came up. They weren't able to make it. And now Jeremy's stuck in a pickle. Well, as luck may have it, Sam's daughter, Hannah, is a pretty good singer. She can hold her own. And so we have some music and a track. And somehow it was hoisted upon you to step up and do Abbott and Costello's Who's on First, where you play Abbott? I always get this wrong. Costello. So you do the Costello part, and it went so well that now this is like your 3rd or 4th time doing it. Now you're doing it at other events that aren't Georgia related.
My first Who's on First doing Lou Costello was actually Dave Battlefield a couple years ago.
Okay, so it goes that far back.
That was the first time that I performed it with, I think, Al Pratt. I think he's a volunteer there. What you're thinking of is at the date or the Lakeland event. Jeremy needed somebody to just make car noises, basically,
okay.
Or just he needed somebody else up on the stage, and I'm sitting there minding my business, enjoying the show, and he goes, "Oh, well, there's this young corporal that is excellent at making car noises." And earlier in the night, he was joking, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna call you up, and you're gonna be a part of the show." I'm like, "No, you're not. There's no way." Well, I got caught up, and I'm like, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" "I need you to make sound effects." Like what? Car noises.
Okay, we're here to entertain the fine listeners of the What's the Scuttlebutt. I need to hear these car sounds. I need to hear these sound effects. So I want to hear a 38 Studebaker.
They're terrible.
Okay, how about a Model T?
Oh, I couldn't even do it that.
So when you were up on stage in front of the crowd and he was having you make noises, how did that go over?
It went over great because everybody knew that. I was totally unprepared for it. So I was just coming up with like noises just out of thin air.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, oh yeah, and there's a tire that springs leak.
Bahooga.
Backfire.
And so that progresses into you doing a little Who's on First. Now, this is a bit that was very well known to me and the people my generation, but some of the younger cats may not be familiar with it. Here's the original.
Strange names like Dizzy Dean and
Daffy.
Daffy Dean.
I'm
and
her cousin.
Who are you?
Goofy.
Goofy. Well, let's see. We have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
That's what I want to find out.
And then I say who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
Yeah, you know the
And
fellow's
that-
names?
Yes,
Well, who's on first?
yes,
I mean the fellow's name.
yes.
I mean the guy playing first.
Who?
The fellow playing first.
Who?
The first baseman.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who is on first?
Well, what are you asking me for?
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Who is on first?
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's
Well,
name.
go ahead and tell me.
That's the man's
That's
name.
whose name?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who?
The fellow playing first.
Look, who is on
Have
first?
you got a first baseman?
Yes.
Who's playing there?
Yes.
All I'm trying to find out is what's the guy's name on first base?
No, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. Don't mix them up. What is on second?
Who's on second?
No, who is on first?
I don't know.
He's on third now. We're not talking about him.
How did I get on third base?
You just mentioned his name.
If I mention the third baseman's name, who did I say is playing third?
No, who's playing first?
Never mind first. I don't know. What's the guy's name on third base?
What's on second?
Who's on second?
Who's on first?
I don't know.
Third base.
And it goes on and on from there to the outfield, the infield, the shortstop. Everybody has a crazy name.
What's playing first?
No, what's on second?
I don't know.
And it holds up over time. And you're getting to the point now where at some point you're going to have to get to the point where you can put that paper down and just go off script and have it memorized. Have you thought about committing this to memory yet, since it's starting to become a more and more reoccurring presentation for you?
Steve Rink, who does Bud Abbott, him and I have talked about that. About either the next time we do it or the time after that, doing it right off of memory.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable for that yet. That was only the second time I did it.
The funny thing is, I'm looking at you up here on the screen, and you have a blue button-up shirt with pinstripes. You still have a pencil mustache. And I'm looking at him on the YouTube, and this is actually a colorized video. And there's actually a bunch of World War servicemen. They may have been 40s, maybe late 40s. I'm not sure when this was filmed. This was put up in 2015. But he has on a dark blue sweater with a light blue sport coat, no lie, with navy square pinstripes on it. Just a bigger version. The pattern's a little larger than the shirt you're wearing right now. It's hilarious. So I can definitely see there's a bit of a likeness there.
When we did the Dade Battlefield, who's on first, they actually had a movie poster of Bud Abbott and Lou Costello, and I was all in my get up. Chris Heesh, I think, was the one who pointed it out to me. He goes, "Holy crap, you look almost like him."
Yeah.
I'm like, there's no way I look over and I'm like, yeah, there is a resemblance there.
Yeah, the resemblance is definitely there. That's great. So, I don't know, it seems to me like maybe because it was due to the COVID stuff and all of us not getting as many events in as we did, but it seems like the hobby itself, at least in Florida, seems to be bouncing back a bit. There's like 3 or 4 new faces at this last event, and which you don't see a whole hell of a lot, especially faces that young. These cats are pretty young. They're about your age, but you've been around a while. And so there's a group of some new guys and even one of them's girlfriend who were there that I had never seen at an event before. And I don't know how many they have been in, if this is their first or second or third, but it's nice to see, the hobby growing.
Yeah, I mean, for Brent and them, That was their third or fourth event, and they're actually a part of 41st. That's how they got into the hobby somehow. They came to one of the events that World War II Armor was at, and we were there. And oh, how can I join? That's how Brent got into it. And then Jordan, his friend, was like, "Oh, I want to do this too." And VKE was actually his first event.
Gotcha. So I mean, and going to that event, it definitely re-sparked my candle a little bit. I was getting, we didn't put out a whole hell of a lot of episodes during COVID just because, there's a lot of history based and World War II based podcasts out there. And as Jeff and I were talking last week, unless somebody can prove me wrong, I take the mantle of being the first primarily living history based podcast out there. And so there's people who have production value and do this full time who are, employees of museums and things like that who may provide more detail and more production value when it comes to the sharing of the history of World War II and all that. And we mix that in and we try to, and that's part of the reason why we interview World War II reenactors because, we all study this in our personal time. But when you have a podcast that's primarily, and that's why I call it a World War II based podcast because it's based around World War II, and it's let's be honest, it's unless I can find a vet to interview, it's a lot of living history and reenacting talk, and I'm fine with that because that's what we are. And so when you have a podcast that's strongly based around the hobby, and then you have a year like 2020 where there's no events to have except for 2 of them, it really just kind of blows your steam out of your sails. And so now that we got another event under our desk, and there's a living history event coming up in June, and then, we always take the horrible hot summers off here in Florida. The winter will be rolling around and we going full steam ahead, but I'm still trying to get some, they're getting harder and harder to find, but I'm trying to get some veterans. I actually saw a TikTok tonight. There was a lady talking about how she was a child survivor of a concentration camp, and then she started going on talking about how the Germans required people to show their papers and trying to make some sort of cold connection between this and the COVID passports. But that's neither here nor there. But I was wanting to reach out to see if I can set up an interview with her because here's a woman who was a child living in a concentration camp. And so I'm still reaching out, trying to find people who were there during the time to get some more interviews done. But we're trucking along. We got Jeff coming on every once in a while. And the reason he's not here tonight is, once again, this was a makeup for the interview we did at the museum. And I'm just happy to see things are coming along and the hobby's picking back up. Not to get too much into politics, but, if you're a living historian, politics always come up at events. I hope, at least here in Florida, that DeSantis makes this a 2-way sanctuary state. Because if he doesn't, and President Biden gets his way, well, let's be honest, the people pulling his strings in the background gets their way. Part of this new assault rifle ban is going to kill our hobby. We will actually have to fill out federal paperwork to be granted permission to display our historical weapons.
Yep.
So it's not like, I just won't register and not go to the gun range. No. We take these things out to state-ran parks. Sometimes at government-ran air shows on government property. So it's not like it's an option for us, if this were to come to fruition, just not to file the paperwork and hope no one notices when you're set up at an air show on federal property. It's not really an option. So, but if we're becoming a sanctuary state, or more importantly, if the damn thing just flops and no one passes it, then we won't have to worry about it. So it's more than just assault rifles. It affects the M1 Garands, the 1903s, all that stuff. So if that goes through, I could have a huge... we're going to be like Europe. We're all going to be walking around our Ardennics. Which, by the way, if you live in Canada, did you hear about that nonsense? The new Canada assault weapons not assault weapon ban, assault weapon like ban. You can't even have an airsoft gun that looks like an AR-15 in Canada now.
Sheesh.
They've actually gone after airsoft, and anything that even resembles an AR-15 is now illegal up there. So the airsoft community just took a huge hit. Not only the guns, but I mean, if you can't go out carrying a rifle that looks like an M16 or AR-15, these cats aren't going to be buying fake carrier plates. They're not going to be buying the fake camouflage. They're not going to be buying the fake, modern day helmets off of Wish to get their uniform right. That's a big hit for a lot of industries just because they can't have the gun. And so it just goes to show you that when things are that crazy, could you imagine that where you couldn't even have a Denix? That, oh, well, you can't have that Denix that looks like, imagine if you're a Vietnam, if you're a Canadian Vietnam living historian, which may sound weird to some of the older cats listening to this podcast, but that's a thing now. Not only are people doing Vietnam, there's people kind of talking about doing, Operation Desert Storm just because their dad may have served during that time or their uncle. And that's how a lot of this hobby is. A lot of this hobby, people get involved because someone in their family participated in that particular era. Me, my grandfather was in the war. There's plenty of people whose grandfather was in Vietnam. There's people whose father was in Operation Desert Storm. And so, like, if you're in Canada, like, now you can't have a freaking Denix or anything that looks like an M16. Well, there goes your Vietnam impression. So it's just crazy. So we'll hopefully that doesn't interfere with what we're doing, because you and I are living it ever since the Paul Night, and we've brought this up, and I don't want to beat people over the head, but the whole thing with the no live firing on Florida state-owned parks. Okay, well, that's great if you're a Spanish-American War, Revolutionary War, Civil War reenactor. World War I, World War II, Vietnam, sorry. You guys can set up a static display, which is fine for us, but we know when there's no boom boom, it's a smaller audience.
Yep.
We're in a multimedia world. People like the sound effects. People like the display, the battle reenactment, or even the timeline of the guns, where we get up there and explain what an M1 Garand is, a 1903 Springfield, a Mazda Nagant, a Car 98, squeeze off 3 or 4 rounds. People like to see that. They like the weapons demo. And when you can't even do that, they don't want to show up.
I mean, even if it's a weapons demo, I mean, that...
Yep.
Like, yeah, battle. Like, okay, like, that's their excuse. Oh, it's a safety hazard.
Yeah, but we can't do a weapons demo. And
I can't do a weapons demo. I mean, a weapons demo, at least you have some draw with it with the boom boom, but
I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. I've never heard the official reason why. So my devil's advocate side, the side of me that wants to believe that there's not anything malicious, which I'm sure there may be, I think maybe they're doing it as a personnel manpower saving device. And what I mean by that is you have a bunch of reenactors come out to the park, have a weapons demo, reenactment, 3 or 4 days go by. Karen's out there walking her dog, and she sees a bunch of gun casings laying around, calls up the cops. There must have been a gang fight here. Cops got to come out, investigate, realize, oh, these are blank rounds. There was a World War II reenactment here 2 weeks ago. Not a big deal, but now you just had 3 cops taken off the beat for an hour and a half. Maybe that's it. That would make sense to me, opposed to any other reason they could possibly have, because none of this happened until the Pulse nightclub shooting.
Oh, and it was even after that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It happened after that. So that was the catalyst that kind of forced the hand. So, I don't know.
I mean, I've heard some rumors. I mean, they're rumors, but the rumors that I've heard is it was reenactor based.
Okay.
There was something that happened with the reenactor that did something that he should not have done.
So that caused a statewide blackout? Wow.
When you're in front of a massive crowd and you're right there.
No, okay.
Recording.
Interesting. Yep.
I mean, I can text you who after this, but I'm not gonna.
I have some suspicions, but yeah, this will be good off the air info, and I have some good off the air info for you. Let me just say, the the phrase, those who go woke, go broke. That applies in the history community too, but that'll be another discussion for another time. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us for another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II based podcast. Jeff will be back with us for another episode on behalf of Paul Niccum. Paul, if people want to find you, or are you available? Do you have a public page? Are you on Instagram, or do you use all private for your friends only? Do you care if weird strangers come track you down?
It's fine if they come track me down. My Insta is Paul_Nick, NICC. Yeah, that's all I got is an Instagram.
And as always, you can find more information as well as links to the people who we do interviews with at WTSPWorldWar2.com. And real quick, I mentioned this on my other podcast, the What's in Your Head podcast. The pendulum's kind of swinging back the other way when it comes to technology. For you young cats who don't know a world without Facebook and MySpace, back in the day, you would actually go to people's websites and you'd put their website in your favorite, so you would go to it oftentimes. But now most people just go to Facebook and then click on the links that Facebook posts. But in the case of people who have public persona profiles, such as the What's in Your Head podcast, the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, my D-Train public personality page from when I worked in radio, Facebook sees those as doors to potentially making money. And so unlike you, who can share a meme or share upload something that maybe like a picture from Star Wars, we can't do that because that's all copyrighted content. So they think that's us trying to make money off somebody else's stuff, which is fine. But it gets to the point where if I post, let's just say my D-Train page, I have 1,500 followers. I post a link to the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast page on YouTube. Out of those 1,500 followers, Facebook will say, hey, 35 people have seen this. Give us $10 and we'll make sure 200 more. So I got to pay you for 200 people even though I have 1,500 followers?
It's asinine.
Now, if I only have one Facebook page, we can make that work. I have D-Train, What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, the Fail to Fail podcast, the What's in Your Head podcast, Southwest Florida World War II, OCR, at computers, and then same rule applies to Instagram, which is why I personally think, so you know how the cancel culture comes from Twitter, most of it?
Mm.
Now, here's a fun social experiment. How many people do you know who use Twitter that aren't a politician, aren't in Hollywood, or a musician? How many people in your daily life that are civilians use Twitter?
Not a lot. I'm not even on Twitter.
That's because Twitter is a shit show.
Yeah.
But the reason the media props up Twitter is so they can get their message out for free. See, Twitter doesn't charge them. They know Facebook charges them and they don't get the views on Facebook or Instagram. That's why whenever you see a celebrity, a politician, an athlete on TV, they always put up the Twitter handle. Because they can comment and say what they want, and it gets sent out there at no cost to them. And so in order to get the message out, if you're a media, you got to basically convince the world that Twitter is this big, great place for communication, which it's not. It's where all the cancel culture comes from. But I digress. My whole point of all I'm saying to this is the pendulum's starting to swing back. So when I say head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com, head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com, because if you're relying strictly on Facebook to be notified when we put out new episodes, you ain't never going to know. Because Facebook, well, unless you're the 32 people that they choose to share my post with, you're not going to know unless I start handing out money left and right to make you know. So if you go to WTSP World War II once a week and see the no show, or if you subscribe through a podcast channel like iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Music, you'll be notified whenever a new episode comes out. But if you're strictly relying on Instagram or Facebook, chances are you're not going to know. And so, and a lot more people are going that way. Truthfully, that's why I'm on TikTok. I'm almost up to 8,000 followers right now. I got a video where I'm talking about the 99-cent price point on Arizona iced tea that has 65,000 views on it. and it didn't cost me a dime. So if you want to know why I spend all my time on TikTok, because people actually see my content, and it doesn't cost me a dime. And that in Facebook, let's be honest, Facebook's and Twitter censoring the hell out of everybody anyhow. And so the fact that all the censorship's going on, the fact that they're kind of pushing people away, my whole point is rely less on Facebook and Instagram letting you know what's going on in the world, and start finding websites, add them to your favorites, and check them out once a week, because that's where a lot of the content's going to be found. So now that diatribe's over, Paul, thank you so much for hanging out with us, and thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. We will talk to you all soon, and I'm just pulling up my audio board here so I can kick off the theme song, and here we go.
This has been a Digital 410 production.